Metroid Prime 2 is considered by some as the black sheep of the Metroid Prime Trilogy, not just in how it was presented, but it was also considered somewhat of a commercial failure, barely able to pass 1 million copies sold on the GameCube when it was released in 2004, nearly 20 years ago. So in this video we'll be discussing why this happened and also how some of the issues fans have had with the game could be fixed in the upcoming and heavily rumored Metroid Prime 2 Remastered as we move forward to getting the highly anticipated Metroid Prime 4. So if you enjoy this discussion and are excited about these upcoming new Metroid Prime releases, hit the like button and subscribe because this upcoming year is looking like it could be a big one for the Metroid Prime series. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was released on November 15th, 2004 on the Nintendo GameCube, and it was also one of the higher reviewed games on the GameCube by critics, scoring a 92 on Metacritic. However, it scored lower than Metroid Prime 1 by a decent margin, and many Metroid fans who thought Metroid Prime 1 was one of the greatest games of all time thought that Metroid Prime 2 was a big step back actually in the series, not a step forward. Now of course hindsight is 2020 and almost 20 years have passed since Metroid Prime 2 was released, and the game has got a much more positive reception now by more and more people who have taken the time to play the game all the way through. And for some even, Metroid Prime 2 is their favorite game in the trilogy. However, even recently during my own playthroughs of Metroid Prime 2 in my live streams, I've seen quite a few people tell me that Metroid Prime 2 wasn't a game that they were interested in finishing, and it just didn't appeal to them like Metroid Prime 1 did back in 2002. And since it is factually the lowest selling Metroid Prime game, it makes a lot of sense to take a closer look at why this happened with Metroid Prime 2. Now with Metroid Prime 1 being Samus' first game to enter the full 3D realm, the game was treated with such an amazing amount of care by Retro Studios, which was also debuting their first game as a studio for Nintendo on the GameCube. Prime 1 was going to be a major step for Metroid, which gave Nintendo and Retro Studios a big focus to make sure they got the Metroid formula to work in 3D, which of course they did a fantastic job with. And if you take a look at how the gameplay works in Metroid Prime 1, you can kind of compare it in many ways to what a Super Metroid in 3D would be like. And Metroid Prime 1 ended up being an amazingly well-paced game with one big world to explore, with beautiful and varied environments that give you a look at all the elements like forests, lava, ice, and futuristic landscapes, which basically made Metroid Prime 1 the entire package. So how is Metroid Prime 2 going to top or equal Metroid Prime 1? That was a big question that fans had when it was revealed at E3 2004.
My name is Reggie. I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about making games.
And what ended up happening is that Retro Studios knew that they couldn't just repeat the same designs and areas all over again for Metroid Prime 2. They wanted to innovate on that gameplay design in new areas and new gameplay mechanics. So instead of just making a game like so many other sequels have done in the past, where it's usually the if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality, Retro Studios made Metroid Prime 2 different in atmosphere, world design, and gameplay. And this came in a few ways, but mainly they did this by adding the dark and light world gameplay mechanic with the exploration of planet Ether, which automatically gave Metroid Prime 2 a much darker and drab look to its presentation. The game's setting had a lot less colorful environments, and the dark world, which you spend probably close to half the game in, is always just one dark color. Now looking back on the presentation of Metroid Prime 2, I can safely say that this likely had a big impact on the sales of the game when it first came out in 2004. The game lacked the same flash and color of Metroid Prime 1, and a lot of the gameplay trailers that were shown didn't display the game in a very good light, a lot of brown colors and dark purples and so forth. So upon first inspection of Metroid Prime 2, say for someone back in 2004, the game could have come off as looking like another Metroid Prime game, but not as pretty. And I heard this actually a lot back then from people, that the game just didn't look as appealing as Metroid Prime 1 did, so they ended up skipping it. Also, on top of that, if you recall back in the early 2000s, renting video games was a major business for companies like Blockbuster Video, for example. So when Metroid Prime 2 came out, you likely had thousands and thousands of people who were big fans of Metroid who might have been on the fence after seeing trailers of Metroid Prime 2, kind of taking a wait-and-see approach to the game, go out and then rent it first just to see if this new Dark World mechanic was going to be something that they liked versus how the game was in Metroid Prime 1. Since the Dark World was also something that trailers of Metroid Prime 2 were making a big deal about when they revealed it, and how this big world was going to be expanded in that Dark World was likewise a big risk being taken by Retro Studios, so naturally some people were skeptical if this game was going to be something that they wanted, which in turn only likely increased the amount of people who were renting Metroid Prime 2 first instead of buying the game on day one. Metroid Prime 2 is both a product and a victim, you could say, of its time. Now, what was a lot of players' response when first playing Metroid Prime 2 back in 2004? Well, Metroid Prime 2 early on in the game introduces two areas of play, the hub area called Temple Grounds and Agon Wastes. But the issue with these areas is that they both look very similar to one another, and it's deep focus on brown colors, and then they introduce on top of that the Dark World, which is this drab, singular, dark purple color, which also drains your health very fast all the way up until you unlock the Dark Suit, which helps slow down your health drain when you beat the first major boss in Agon Wastes. And then finally, to cap all that off, Metroid Prime 2 has very similar looking space pirates in this opening area, which feels like a continuation of sorts from the Phazon mines from Metroid Prime 1, which many agree is the least visually appealing area in that game. So when you examine all of this, Metroid Prime 2 had multiple visual design issues working against it right off the bat, all within the first 2 to 3 hours of the game, and many people in 2004 that tried the game, either by renting it or perhaps playing it at a friend's house, may have been turned off by this and ended up not wanting the game. However, what about the people that actually played Metroid Prime 2 and finished the game all the way through? They also had a number of issues with Metroid Prime 2 as well, with the main one being the feeling of excessive backtracking, especially in its final fetch quest of keys at the very end before the final boss. Now, if you played any Metroid game or Metroid Prime game in general, you know that backtracking is a main part of its gameplay. In fact, it's usually extremely fun and some of the best parts of those games because you're being rewarded by unlocking new areas from an upgrade that you likely earned or discovered along your journey. However, I will agree that in Metroid Prime 2, some of the backtracking feels unnecessary with traveling through areas that don't feel rewarding for the player. But we'll cover more on that in a bit when we discuss how they could improve Metroid Prime 2 in the potential remastered version. Now, another criticism of Metroid Prime 2 was that the bosses were too difficult, with people apparently complaining so much so that when Metroid Prime Trilogy was released in 2009 on the Wii, Retro Studios made the Prime 2 bosses easier on normal mode than they were on the GameCube, and to a lesser extent, some even complained that they didn't like the beam ammo system in Metroid Prime 2, wanting not to be limited by how much they could shoot the light and dark beams. But I will say that this particular complaint is much less talked about versus some of the other issues people had with the game. What it seemed like Retro Studios was trying to do was introduce Metroid Prime 2's early parts of the game as something more familiar to players who played Metroid Prime 1, but it ended up falling kind of flat when you look back on it, since you got very similar looking areas to Phazon mines like the Agon Waste and the Temple Grounds, some similar looking and behaving space pirates, and all you had yet again was your power beam to start the game. Now, despite all that, the interesting thing about Metroid Prime 2 is that after you get through those first couple hours of play, the game opens up and becomes a true next level step forward for a Metroid Prime game, at least from my perspective. And we can get into why this game is amazing perhaps when Metroid Prime 2 Remastered comes out, but suffice to say, if it were not for the first parts of Metroid Prime 2 having some issues, I really think the game would have been received by critics and fans much better, and it may have even increased its sales by a good degree. A lot of times, first impressions of a game will be the make or break of it, and it won't matter how great a game is later on if the first few hours are not really what people like. They simply will not play it anymore. And we've seen this quite a few times in 2023 as well, when you have games like The Last of Us Part 1 on PC, Jedi Survivor, Starfield, and Lords of the Fallen, for example, are released at launch with issues and need a lot of patching. Many times people will just not play the game due to that, even if the games are fixed later, which each of those games that I mentioned have indeed been fixed. So in the case of Metroid Prime 2, we have a rare opportunity coming sometime in 2024 to get a remaster of the game that could easily outsell the original GameCube release. And there are a few things I like to discuss that could really help make the game feel more accessible to people who may have skipped Metroid Prime 2 back in the day. And granted, some things will likely never be fixed, but there's a couple things Retro Studios could do that are minor from a technical perspective to implement, but could be a major game changer for people wanting to play the game for the first time. And these could all be optional additions to the game, basically like a mode that adds modern quality of life fixes, and another mode could also be available that has the gameplay exactly like the original release. And we saw something similar to this in Metroid Prime 1 Remastered, with its control options having multiple types to mimic the original GameCube game, and one with motion controls that would be like the Wii Trilogy re-release, and another control option that would work with the Switch Pro controller the best. So for a Metroid Prime 2 modern mode, what I'd like to see them add is the ability for the player to put waypoints on the map in both the light and dark worlds, which would make it similar to Metroid Dread and how that game did its waypoints, just so you can have a point of reference for your location on the map. Now I realize that Metroid Prime 1 Remastered does not have waypoints, but you also didn't have to manage two world maps that aligned in parallel worlds to each other like you do in Metroid Prime 2. I think that having waypoints would help people from walking around in circles a lot less in the dark world, especially since even in Metroid Prime 2 Remastered, I'm not expecting the dark world's color scheme to look much different. You'll still be seeing areas that look very similar to each other when you're in the dark world. Now, another addition they could add to the map would be having sections on it that glow a bit similar yet again to what was in Metroid Dread. I can tell you by experience that I've had multiple 100% playthroughs of Metroid Prime 2 that have gone differently each time due to missing perhaps one item somewhere and not having a clue as to where it would be in the entire map in both worlds. It's those times where having just a little bit of a hint, like a part of the map lighting up ever so slightly, could save you a lot of time backtracking and searching so many places that have nothing there for you to find. For new players of Metroid Prime 2, this could be a make or break addition, since there's no way someone's going to remember every upgrade location that they've been in with a game as gigantic as Metroid Prime 2, and it's unrealistic to expect that from new players. So adding both waypoints and areas that are slightly highlighted on the map could really help players enjoy this game a lot more for their first time playing. Now, in terms of backtracking for the keys though, on that final fetch quest, I personally don't think that this was actually much of a problem in the original game. What I do think the issue was, however, is when you add in all the other backtracking the game already has you doing, and sometimes feeling like it's aimless backtracking on top of it. This is probably where most people playing at that point had enough of it when they got to that part of Metroid Prime 2 at the end. And speaking of backtracking, another thing they could add to cut down on some of this very needless traversal is putting a portal inside the energy controller rooms in each major area that requires you to transfer energy from Samus to them after you beat a big boss of an area, since you have to do it in both the dark and light worlds. The problem is, the game forces you to travel all the way to each energy controller room just to transfer the energy from Samus without a close portal to use, which means you'll be yet again backtracking for a while just to get there, when it could be done almost instantly if there were portals inside those controller rooms, so you could just go there after you beat a boss in the dark world, since the bosses are usually in the dark world in Prime 2 and are placed right by the energy control room. So if a portal was inside the dark world energy control room, you can then go right to the light world energy control room and transfer the energy there and be done. But in the original game as it stands, it's just not possible to do so. Next, there's also an odd design choice in Metroid Prime 2 with these dark commando space pirates that you face, which most occur in Torvus Bog. What they designed the game to do is lock the doors on the player when facing dark commandos that phase in and out of the spectrum, but you can see them and track them with your dark visor. The issue is, the doors lock each and every time you go in these certain rooms, no matter how many times you've fought these dark commandos. Now, personally, I think it's fine if they lock the door for the first time you face them, since this is what they did in Metroid Prime 1, but each time after, the doors should not be locked on the player. Metroid Prime 2 has a lot of backtracking, as we've already stated, so chances are many people will get turned around and enter one of those rooms by mistake and then be forced to fight and be locked in with those dark commandos for no real reason, since the game doesn't give you anything as a reward for fighting them either. So this has always been an odd design choice in my opinion that I think can easily be fixed by simply letting you through the doors and not locking them. So those are the main gameplay fixes that I think they can add that could really make it more enjoyable for new players, but I want to make it clear that this could be an option that you can simply turn on or turn off as a mode you can choose to play. I don't think it's really that hard to do in the game. These are things that are very minor that could add a great deal of quality of life to new players who would perhaps find the original way the game was designed as much more cumbersome and frustrating. Now lastly, what about the graphical design of the game, especially in the temple grounds and Agon Wastes, looking so similar and not standing out that much in the game? Well, that might be something that the graphical upgrade in Metroid Prime 2 Remastered could really help with, and I know we've heard rumors that Prime 2 and Prime 3 won't have the graphical overhaul like Prime 1 did, but they'll still be improved and look great in HD. So there might not be too much done to the temple grounds or Agon Wastes in terms of their design, but one thing that could make those areas stand out better is adding some more impressive lighting and shadows with perhaps some added bloom effects here and there. But as it stands, I don't really see them being able to fix those areas too much besides that without totally remaking and redesigning them. But the good news is I do think that if they add some of those gameplay quality of life fixes, people will be more likely to continue playing after getting through Agon Wastes and seeing the full gameplay loop of Metroid Prime 2. Either way though, Metroid Prime 2 is a legendary game, very much worth a remaster by Retro Studios, and I can't wait to see this happen possibly in 2024. But until then, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about all this. Please let me know your thoughts about Metroid Prime 2 and if you think it's been fairly criticized over the years and it's really needing these gameplay updates like we've been talking about, or if you think there's nothing that needs to be done or changed about this game whatsoever and that's fine the way it is, let me know in the comments section. Alright guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.